Hello again. I'm here with another set of book reviews. This time there are 3 horror book reviews that I'm going to cover. So I'm going to be covering Camp Slasher by Dan Padova. Sorry, I'm butchering that name. The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones, and The Walking by Bentley Little. So, before I start this up again, let me show off my new intro. And I am back. So, I had a little, a bad taste in my mouth from reading that Camp Slaughter book. So I wanted to actually read some more slasher horror books. So the first one here that I read here was The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. Let me read the description here. Life in a slasher film is easy. You just have to know when to die. Aerial view, a suburban town in Texas. Everyone's got an automatic garage door opener. All the kids jump off a perilous cliff into a shallow river as a rite of passage. The sheriff is a local celebrity. You know this town. You're from this town. Zoom in. Homecoming princess. Lindsay. She's just barely escaped death at the hands of a brutal, sadistic murderer in a Michael Jackson mask. Up on the cliff, she was rescued by a horse and bravely defeated the killer alone, braless. Her story is already a legend since the town's heroic final girl, then virgin angel. Monster Vision, Halloween mask floating down the same river the kids jump into, but just as one slaughter is not enough for Billie Jean, one masked killer, one victory is not enough for Lindsay. Her high school is full of final girls, and she's not the only one who knows the rules of the game. When Lindsay chooses a host of virgins, misfits, and former final girls to replace the slaughtered memories of her original homecoming, it's not just a fight for survival, it's a fight to become the last final girl. Alrighty, so if you see a little bit of that intro, it talks about kind of like aerial view, fade in. There's a lot of directions that way. It'll be like, cut to scene where, a person's in closet or something like that. And it's trying to be, a little bit more cinematic wise. And sadly, it's good. I mean, sometimes it works great. Sometimes the way the transitions work, it really makes you feel kind of like a horror film. But sometimes the transitions just kind of get in the way. It took me out of the story a lot. The other thing that took me out of the story a lot is this story, especially with Lindsay and the way they talk about, being a final girl. It's very self-aware, very Scream-esque, to the point where it got annoying, to be honest with you. And sadly, The Last Final Girl didn't do it for me because of that. Again, it had, the characters were a little bit more interesting than Slaughter, but it still was just so kind of just annoying after a while. This whole meta thing was just getting me really annoyed. The whole, I don't know if it was even trying to be maybe like a humorous type of book, but it just fell flat for me. And sadly, I couldn't really recommend this book. I think it just, with the different stage directions, the way they wrote it in, with the different ways that the characters were just way too meta to really make you even feel like it was that kind of story, that it was a slasher story. I just couldn't really get into it, and I couldn't really recommend The Last Final Girl. So after reading Last Final Girl and Camp Slaughter, I was almost a little down on slasher horror until I read this one. This is Camp Slasher, not Camp Slaughter, a gory, dark horror novel. And let me read what this story was about here. Lost in the dark woods, stalked and butchered, head severed and tossed into the bushes. She is the first to die. The body count will grow. Slasher horror in the vein of Friday the 13th, Halloween, and Texas Chainsaw, a group of young counselors set out to rebuild Camp Black Bear, but a bloodthirsty killer stalks the woods. Now 2 counselors must survive the night in the forest. The killer is hunting them. He won't stop until they are dead, and the nearest town is 10 miles away. Where is the sheriff who promised to keep them safe? Can the counselors evade the killer until help arrives? More victims are found murdered in the woods. The vehicles are destroyed and the radio disabled. No escape. Footsteps in the dark. The killer is coming. So what did I think about this book? I really like this book. I was so happy that I actually got a slasher novel that I really liked. The story is good. I mean, the villain, the serial killer, or actually killers, in this story are not really well developed, as far as like they're just kind of there. But that's kind of how you had it in most of the 80s horror thrillers. It was like he was this big killer, and the real story, the real gem that this story does, is in all of these other characters. These other characters, and yes, some of them are, you got the typical bully. You got one kid who's kind of like, considered like the bad kid because he got in a tussle and wound up getting into like a fight, and then he had some jail time, and then, people didn't trust this one kid, and he's in the story. There's also this great story between the sheriff and the deputy, where the deputy wants to kind of make the sheriff look bad because he wants to win in the next election. So he's kind of like focusing on this kid that the sheriff kind of let slide, and he wants to kind of like prove that, the sheriff was negligent by letting this kid slide a little bit and letting him go into this camp. And of course, it's a camp where these counselors are rebuilding the camp. So it definitely smacks of Friday the 13th, has that image to it. But like I said, the thing that I loved about the story is the characters. I mean, I can sit here and I can tell you about a bunch of these characters. I can tell you about how some of these characters had these different motivations and what was going on with these characters. And that's what I really liked about the story. Yes, they had a killer. And yes, there was some really creepy, very gory kill scenes in this story. The ending was kind of a typical, maybe is there a sequel type of ending that came through. It didn't kind of completely wrap everything up. But still, otherwise, like I said, I really like the story. And I think if anybody who likes the classic slasher movies of the 80s will really enjoy this story. Again, if you see, it's on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, I highly recommend, just giving it a read. It's, again, a well done slasher novel that, makes me definitely, long for the 80s and the 80s kind of horror films. And it just fits perfectly with exactly what I'm kind of looking for in that kind of genre. It just gives you a little bit of depth in the characters, enough of good kills. Yes, the only drawback I would say to this is the killer could have been developed more. Still was really cool. Still was really creepy. And just a enjoyable book to me. And that's my review of Camp Slasher. The last one I'm going to cover here is, of course, another Bentley Little book. I've been on a Bentley Little kick. I've been trying to read a bunch of Bentley Little books. You'll be probably seeing a bunch of Bentley Little books in my future reviews of horror books, because I'm trying to catch up and read a bunch of Bentley Little books that I haven't read. He's putting out at least 30 books, so I think I probably have only read maybe like 10 of them so far, so I have a bunch to read. But this one is called The Walking. So let me read what this says here. It begins in a small southwestern town, then it spreads across the country. A series of strange deaths have overtaken the living, and a strange compulsion has overtaken the dead. In a travesty of life, they drift with bizarre purpose towards an unknown destination. The walkers have become an obsession for investigator Miles Hudine. His father is one of them. Now lured into the shadow of the restless dead, Miles is a step closer to a secret as old as time, to a reality as dark as hell. For Miles is following them into the deep end of an yeah. Miles is following them into the deep end of an unfathomable nightmare. Okay, so let me pull up my notes on this one. So I didn't really like how they described that there. So I'm going to basically tell you kind of what the story was about. Uh, there are these people who die. From what I've seen, most of them I think died of natural causes, so it wasn't kind of like a freaky like all these magic deaths. But they were these people who would die. One person had cancer, one person I guess had a stroke later on, or was bedridden. But these people die, and what happens is they start walking around, which you actually have the Walking Dead. So these people are walking around, and they start walking in circles in the beginning, and then slowly but surely they start walking to this location. And of course, you have this investigator, and he links up with some other people, and some other people kind of all band together to figure out what's going on and where this is leading to. And the backstory about this is there is this town that was founded they describe how the Mormons avoided prosecution, so they went to Utah. Well, this town was from witches who want to avoid prosecution. So this was a town of witches that was formed. And basically, like Bentley Little does, is he talks about this olden town and how it was formed, and then you suddenly find out about this. There's one woman who comes into the town and marries like the head person of the town, and how she's really creepy. You find out about this dam that they're about to build, and this dam that they did build, and what happened to the town. I mean, you see a kind of little hint here with this cover, and what happened to the town. And it is just typical Bentley Little for me. This is another win in the Bentley Little column that I think if you're a fan of Bentley Little, you would definitely enjoy it. The woman in this book, the evil villain, I guess, is creepy as heck. The symbolism and the actual just scenes of just gross weird stuff that happens in this town and what happens to these people is definitely, again, typical Bentley Little. All the town getting together, all trying to go on this quest, I guess you would want to call it, to try to save their dead family members from being controlled by this witch. It's just, again, to me, it's just a typically well done Bentley Little book. I mean, I would rate it up there. It's not, again, I have top favorites that I've had for Bentley Little, but this is definitely up there. This would probably be in like the top 4 or 5 books for me. I think it's actually well done Bentley Little book. I think anybody who's a fan of Bentley Little will have no problem getting into this book. And that's my review for The Walking by Bentley Little. So again, if you stayed this long, I thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you soon.